How's it going, everybody? Just a follow-on video from last week's one where I was talking about seed sowing and the importance of not getting started too early. And I said I'd follow up with a video just giving you some of the things you might need to start sowing seed. Now we're still, we're at the end of January here now, and it is still extremely mild. Like today it's 12 degrees outside. It's the sun is shining, and it really does feel like we should be sowing seed, but it's still only January, albeit the last day of January. So don't panic yet. It's still lots of time now. I will start sowing probably next week with just a couple of things, and I'll show you that on a video. But today I just want to run through what we need to do or what we need to have in order to sow seeds. And it's the simplest thing in the world, really, because seeds, by their nature, they want to grow, and all we need to do is create the right conditions for them to grow. So I'm going to run through, if you're new to this, you're going to hear all this different types of terminology and words and things that you might need or you could need, and it's just to clarify what those things are and show you, explain to you what they are and when they're used and so on. So starting off, the first thing obviously is compost, and I suppose there's a huge amount of talk about peat-free compost being the way to go, and I agree. It's a very environmentally friendly compost, and it's, I suppose, the way we all should be going as opposed to peat-based compost. However, if you're based in Ireland, your options for peat-based compost, especially for sown seeds, are very, very limited. In fact, they're limited to probably one type of peat-free seed sowing compost. And I suppose because of that, then it's difficult enough to find it. You can buy it online, but our options are very limited. Now I look across to the UK and I see it shows every year they have such a great range. So I suppose ideally you would be using peat-free compost, but I do think here in Ireland we're still a little bit limited on that. So with that in mind, if you can at all, use peat-free. It is, obviously better for the environment and so on. But in Ireland, as I say, we don't have that luxury at the moment of having the choice, really. People say that's lazy on behalf of industry and all the rest of it, and maybe it is. But as a gardener, the choice that you have at the moment is very limited. So with a result, you're looking at peat compost or peat-based compost if you can't get the peat-free version. And when it comes to it, like, there's so many different seed sowing composts out there. Anybody that does compost does a seed sowing compost. Now, my personal experience with those is very, very mixed. I've had some very, very good ones, and then the next year used the same brand, the same seed sowing compost, and have totally different results. Or even from one bag to the next, I see very mixed results. So with that in mind, I always now use just ordinary multi-purpose compost, and I find that there's never any variances in it, and it's always, as you open the last bag, it's always pretty much the same. It's also quite airy, so this is a multi-purpose compost. It's quite airy, and it's a really good compost for starting seeds. So if you are at it for the first time, a nice loose multi-purpose compost is the way to go. As I say, seed sowing composts are available, but I just really find really mixed success with it. Last year, for example, I did use one, and the seeds germinated fine, but then they just sat there. So it was really poor compost. If you're going to have something in it for a little while, I tend to mix a little bit of seaweed meal through it as well, just a little small bit that gives a little bit of feeding as it grows along. So that's compost covered. I said ideally we'd be using peat-free, but at the moment, if you're listening in Ireland or you're watching in Ireland, it's multi-purpose, I think, is kind of a good option if you can't access the peat-free one that I'm talking about. So starting off, the few things that you're going to need. You'll hear people referring to a seed tray, and this is basically what they call a full seed tray. So it's a 14x7 seed tray. That's the standard size. You can also get these in half sizes. Now the half sizes are ideal if you're going on windowsills and you want to have several different types of seed. But that's a standard seed tray. You'll see there's a lot of holes in the bottom of it. So it's really well drained. It has a double layer of draining as well. So there's 2 layers within it, because drainage is key when you're sowing seed. You can't have waterlogged or wet compost. They need to be able to drain freely, because wet compost actually is very cold and holds the cold, and we obviously don't want that for germinating seeds. So that's a seed tray. If you're not going out buying seed trays, you can have, that's a milk carton. That was a 2 litre milk carton, just cut down the centre. That gives you the same effect. As I say, you fill in your compost, whatever it is that you're growing with, in there, and you can sow your seeds into that, and it sits on the windowsill. Now this wouldn't obviously have drainage, so what you'd be inclined to do here, rather than watering it, you might mist it. So you'll mist the top of it so that you're definitely not over watering, because you won't have anywhere for the water to get away. But as I said, that's just a milk carton, a grape punnet or a food punnet, can also do the same trick, and they're simple to do as well. So that's a seed tray. And then you'll hear about modular trays. Now modular trays or cell trays or multi-cell trays are essentially a seed tray but with cells in it, and here's a few different versions. So that's a standard multi-cell tray. These are the ones that bedding plants typically come in, and it has 9, this one has 9 cells, but you can get them, bigger trays with 14, 15, 24, 48, different size cells in it. And these are particularly useful for veg growing, where you're putting a singular veg plant in here, whether that's some of your brassicas or lettuce, and then you take that out. You're taking out a decent clump of compost with it, and you're planting it into your soil. You can hold seedlings for a lot longer in these. Now what I use, so there's loads of versions of them. You can again use recycled ones from bedding plants, or you can go out and buy them. What I use is basically these ones. These ones will be used by commercial growers, and I know other people, like there's 60 cell trays that you can get that are quite good. Now the real benefit of modular trays, or any of these type of units, is that you'll get a hell of a lot more seedlings in a small area. So this one here, for example, is 308 cells. So I'll get 308 vegetable plants in a very small, like 2 foot square area, and that's the real benefit of modular trays, as opposed to a seed tray. You're going to get quite a small amount of seedlings in this for the space. So that's the benefit, the real benefit of them, and you can hold them a bit longer until they're ready to plant out. Propagators, then you'll hear people talking about propagators. So essentially a propagator is a seed tray of any sort with a perspex lid on it, or some sort of a covering on the top of it. Now that is an unheated propagator, so it's the standard seed tray with a standard lid on it, which has ventilation on the top of it, so you can open and close it to adjust the temperature and adjust the humidity inside in it. But that's what it does. It keeps in the heat, keeps in the humidity in the seed growing area. Again, if you're using a homemade DIY job, it's something as simple as this, with a plastic bag over the top of it, or cling film or something like that. So it's essentially the same thing. You're creating that environment in the top of it. And that's a unheated propagator. So it still needs the heat from externally. So if that's in a tunnel, or if this is in a glass house, you're needing the heat from outside, from the sun, to heat it. Now if you're growing these on your windowsill inside, obviously you're going to have the ambient temperature of the house, which is more than good, more than sufficient for germinating almost all seeds. So you can use these inside as well. Then a heated propagator. So you can get these in all various sizes, some of them temperature controlled, some of them not. This one is a plug-in one, and essentially you can see it's a big tray, and you plug that in and you sit your seed tray on it, and now when it's plugged in, there's heat coming from the base of the seed tray. So right from underneath, you'll see there, right from underneath, the heat is coming up into the root zone, into where the seeds are going to be germinating, and that's what's called a heated propagator. As I say, some of them you can control the temperature on them. This actual one you can't, but that's what they are, is heated propagators. So you have heated propagators and unheated propagators. Then we move on to what else are you going to need. You're going to need, this is the simplest thing in the world, but always remember to do it. You're going to need labels, so plant labels. So every time you sow seed, you're going to label them, what type of seed it is, the date you sowed it, and because it's surprising. You'll sow all these seeds and you might forget what they are. So just always label. And again, a lollipop stick or an ice pop stick is fine for that. And yeah, that's something else you'll need to do. Some other things that people recommend using for sowing seed, people talk about Pearlite, and this is Pearlite. So it's basically looks like that, white, really, really light, fluffy material. And that's used generally to mix through compost to create aeration in the compost. Now, typically for sowing seeds, if you're using a multi-purpose compost, for example, you won't need to add this, but you will hear people talking about it quite a lot. It's very, very light. There's no weight in it at all. And then pretty much the same thing is Vermiculite. So this is a goldy colour. You'll see there, it's a goldy colour. And this is normally used to top seedlings. So it's really, really light again. So instead of maybe topping with compost or covering with compost, certain seeds would be recommended to cover with Vermiculite. And as I say, really, really light. And so they won't give any restriction to the seedling as it tries to grow. And that's kind of all the bits and pieces that you're going to need. I'm going to do another video next week when I start sowing, and I'm going to show you some things, that and use the terminology that's used when sowing seed. But I think the important thing to remember is that seeds want to grow. They are designed to grow. They really are simple to grow. And so all you have to do is create the right conditions for that. All of these bits and pieces help, but they're not essential. So you can have your DIY versions. Again, I'll just mention, like, we're in the end of January, and I've seen loads of people now with chilies, tomatoes, all of that sown and germinated. But if you go 8 weeks down the line, which is about when you need to plant on these things, 8 weeks time, there's a very good chance that it still won't be warm enough here in Ireland for planting out. Just be careful. While everyone wants to get sowing because it feels like spring as soon as you do, just don't start too early, because you'll always catch up later on. So I hope that helped. As I say, you don't need to get too bogged down in it. Seed does want to grow. Seed is easy to grow, and everybody can do it. So you don't need all this stuff, but just to give you the terminology that you'll see when you start looking into it. And I'll follow up next week with another video as I start to sow my seeds. So I'll be starting very, very slowly with just onions and maybe one or two other things. And then later on, I'll really get into it, and I'll show you that as we go along. So I hope that helped. I hope that cleared up sort of the terminology around growing and sowing seed. And if you like this video, you can subscribe to the channel. And I'm not sure if you've all come across it or not, but I also have a weekly garden podcast called Master My Garden Podcast, and you'll find that on all podcast players. So thanks for watching, and until the next time, happy gardening.